I would say probably one of the most important things with working with athletes and coaches is getting the buy-in. They've got to trust you to actually enact the interventions that you're suggesting. And as you mentioned with homeopathy, for example, I think they get something like 2 or 3 times the amount of time. So a patient going to see a homeopathic doctor would get 2 or 3 times the amount of time that they would get by going to see their regular primary care provider. And so just that care and attention is a big part of the procedure. And so if you can offer that to somebody, I think these are important lessons that we can learn and that we can apply to our own practice as scientists and as medical doctors. Not always that easy because the resources are not there. But I guess we're able to, the tricky part comes when we have to split the difference, because trying to bridge the gap between these two worlds is like, okay, talk about Michael Phelps. I think he's a wonderful example because he's the most successful Olympian of all time, not just the most successful swimmer, but the most successful Olympian of all time in history. And he was and still is a proponent of cupping therapy. Now, as in terms of efficacy, in terms of proven efficacy, cupping has about the same record as homeopathy, in that we know that it doesn't have any direct effect on the body. It works only in the context of placebo. But then when you have somebody like Phelps, who has something like, I don't know, 7 or 8 million followers on Instagram alone, and is posting pictures of him getting cupping therapy. Okay, it's one thing if we promote cupping to offset, muscle aches and pains and, whatever, some soreness, or to facilitate recovery. But the British Cupping Association recommend cupping for treating asthma symptoms, which is like, that's a bit of a slippery slope, right? And if anybody's listening and they have asthma, please don't try and treat your symptoms using cupping therapy. This is one of those scenarios where you really need to be focusing on evidence-based advice. Listen to your doctor, make sure you're not foregoing any mainstream medical treatments, because this can cause over harm. And so I think it becomes I think we're treading on thin ice when athletes, they don't realize how much power and influence that they have in disseminating this kind of advice, even unwittingly. Because and I just anecdotally, whenever I see swimming competitions now, athletes are turning up with big purple circular bruises all over their backs and shoulders, and they never used to before. And I can only think that was Phelps's influence.
What's the mechanism of cupping and asthma, Nick? I mean, I'm just going to try and freestyle with this now. Are they particularly cupping around the diaphragm or on the inspiratory muscles? I'm trying to create some nonsense out of nothing.
Yeah, I think you're thinking too logically and reasonably about this, Steve. I think that
Maybe it's
the
over the
thing,
mouth. Maybe it's
yeah, but maybe it could be it. Or yeah,
hypoxia.
so I think the cupping is at its core, it's an ancient Chinese medicine, but it's an energy medicine. So a lot of the terms that they use nowadays,
Okay.
they use terms like blood flow and helping to stimulate blood flow, but actually you go back 20 years and they were talking about stimulating energy flow. So just like acupuncture is supposed to stimulate energy flow along acupuncture lines or body meridians, and this is all just pseudoscience. It's all just made up science. And so I can only imagine that they're talking about facilitating energy flow to cure, some of these medical ailments. I don't think there's an implied mechanism to it.
No, okay. And naughty me for being sarcastic about it. Um, okay, so
Sometimes I think sometimes derision is a good way to approach these things.
so you don't get as exhausted.
Well, I think if you take everything too seriously, there are so many of these bunk treatments out there that you have to sort of, it's got to be water off a duck's back. I keep getting emails from a professor of exercise science who shall remain nameless, but every time that there's a new product or intervention, some pseudoscience thing, he sends me the link, and he's clearly losing his mind because he's coming across these things on social media every other day. And I had to tell him, look, you gotta let it go, because this is a game of whack-a-mole. But every time you try and debunk one thing or talk about the evidence, there's 100 other things popping up to take their place. So I think it's more important that we teach skills rather than facts, and try and teach people how to navigate this industry rather than worrying about every single bogus intervention.